read your scripture reading later, but I'm not ready to take it anymore. You ready for this one? Do you have a PowerPoint that you need this
I
morning?
didn't do a PowerPoint.
Okay, good. And I think I'm ready for you later too. I hope so, anyway. Yes. Oh, this thing's go. Morning, everyone. I was very excited to have my microphone on, and I realized last time it wasn't even doing anything at all. We had it only using this mic, so here I was diligently putting the mic on. It wasn't doing a thing. Well, let's get that one down here. That's the wrong one. Class time. There we go. Slideshow from the beginning. Thanks. Well, I'd like to welcome you all here. Would you come up and lead us in a word of prayer to get us started? Sure. Thank you.
Let us pray together. Our Father in heaven, thank you, dear Lord, for the many blessings, and we thank you for this opportunity to come together with those of like faith, Father, to study another portion of your word. We pray, dear Heavenly Father, as we continue with our study in Corinthians, that you will be with us. Help us to come to a better understanding of your word, and help us to be able to go into the world and teach it to those who have not heard. Father, we pray that you be with those of our number that are sick. Pray that if it be thy will that you will return them to a normal degree of health, and they will be able to once again join us at the next appointed hour. This we ask in thy Son's name. Amen.
I'm going to jump in the back here. Hopefully I can find that little book I was using last time. I don't think it's there. It's hiding. Here. Thank you. Yes, I do. Oh, this one got all the answers in it. All right. So maybe they might be wrong. Right? Don't copy off your neighbor's homework if they don't know what they're doing. Or even if they do, maybe. Lesson 11, a principle called sacrifice. 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Also, we finished up chapter 8. Does anyone remember what the lesson was for? What is chapter 8 talking about? Because it kind of walks right into chapter 9 in 1 Corinthians.
You're not causing your brother to stumble.
That's right. And really, in another way, it's talking about freedom. We have the freedom as Christians to do a lot of things. However, that doesn't mean that we should. I know that doesn't necessarily make sense sometimes, but what that's saying is that as Christians, we need to be very careful that we don't offend our brothers, especially our weaker brother, right, or sister, that is struggling, that is trying to learn and grow, and instead of helping them along, we just kick them in the head and say, I can do what I want. You can do that. However, that would not be a good choice. So in chapter 8 of 1 Corinthians, we're supposed to be aware of the people around us. And the example here was meat sacrificed to idols. That he would rather never eat meat again than offend one of those brothers or sisters that had a weak conscience. In verse 13 of that chapter, it says, therefore, if food makes my brother stumble, I will never again eat meat, lest I make my brother stumble. Now, we also talked about a little bit of a concept as well. What is one of the things that can be a problem with that concept. Let me try to be a little clearer. Who is it that's choosing not to eat meat in that chapter? The stronger brother, otherwise known as you. Who is it that's not telling me to not eat meat? The weaker brother, right? This isn't a chastisement of people to make sure you're listening to what everybody else tells you to do so they can control you, right? Instead, this is something that's telling you yourself to look at yourself and the people around you and have self-control. I know that seems very simple, but unfortunately there have been many times where this passage has been used to chastise someone else who isn't doing their job because they're not okay, because they have a problem, when this passage is all about me, right? It's about me and my needs and my need for awareness for our brothers and sisters. And the opposite side of that, we can really start to have trouble where we begin trying to control each other. Not because we have a weaker conscience, but just simply because we want to have our way. That is not what this is talking about at all. Instead, this is specifically talking about us regulating ourselves. Why do I bring this up? Because here we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. 1 Corinthians chapter 9, a principle called sacrifice. What is sacrifice?
Giving up something.
Yes, and normally something that maybe we'd rather not, right? Maybe. I mean, it might be fine. Depends on how much you like the lamb that you were slaughtering if you were in the Old Testament, or it depends on how much you like the particular thing that you're not doing because you're not supposed to. But specifically here, Paul is going to start bringing up some other things. And it's hinting to a problem. A problem that the Corinthians had. I don't have my clicker. A problem that the Corinthians have that isn't necessarily directly spoken to, but I think through inference we can get it. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, 1 Corinthians chapter 5, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, 1 Corinthians chapter 1. What are the main problems that the people in Corinth are experiencing? Sin. What kind of sin?
Self-indulgence.
Selfishness. Absolutely. Selfishness. Now, why did I mention that about chapter 8? It's because selfishness would make me try to control you instead of me controlling me. That's part of selfishness. Selfishness would also be me saying, I'm going to eat meat sacrificed to idols, and I don't care if you like it or not. Right? That could also be selfishness. Yes? Selfishness could also be, I'm going to take my brother's wife and I don't care what you say. Selfishness could also be, I'm better than you because I followed a particular person, or because I do something a little bit different than you and look how great I am. These are all things that, while not necessarily directly spoken about, it's in there. Paul's writing this letter on purpose to get the Corinthians' attention. And while our congregation is not in Corinth, and I don't believe this letter was written directly to us, it certainly was in another way. What do we fight in our lives? Selfishness. And if you don't think that's true, who did you see this morning when you looked in the mirror? I hope it was you. If it was someone else, maybe you need to move them out of the way so you can see it coming here. We always think of ourselves first, even when we try not to, because that's who we are, right? Now, that's not wrong, but it is true. It's much harder for us to see someone else and understand how they feel. Oftentimes we look at someone else and we might think, well, if I looked that way, I would feel this way, right? But that's not the same thing, is it? I can remember many times trying to buy a present for my wife. And boy, oh boy, I would go to the store and I would find the coolest things. And when I brought those presents home to her, sometimes she was less impressed with these presents than I thought that she would be. Because I had not considered what she liked, but instead what I liked. and I had gotten her the things that I liked. Now, yes, it's true that my wife also had the same propensity, right? Because we're trying to do something nice for one another. I'm going to bring it up, honey. Sorry. One of my favorite and least favorite things is a tape measure that's battery powered. Why do you need a battery powered tape measure? You do not. There is absolutely no reason ever that you need a battery powered motor on a tape measure. It's not. Look, whoo, it's amazing, right? Now, on the other side of that, it is the absolute coolest thing I have ever had. Because you can sit here and go, and it'll just go right on out 30 feet. And then here it comes on back. You can stop it. You can move it back and forth. That's cool. Completely useless if you're a craftsman trying to build with it. But super cool, and I was honored to have it. And I laughed also because I knew this is one of those things. What's the first thing that's going to happen to your tape measure that's battery powered? Man, the batteries are dead! Ah! Now this battery powered tape measure, wonderful thing with the buttons, doesn't work. It also doesn't work at all because the batteries are dead and now you have to have batteries. It's one of these things that, without knowing it, if we're being unaware of what our preferences of our brothers and sisters are, we can hurt one another. Yes, sir?
Where did you become Tim the Tool Man?
Oh, man. I actually have the time, my friend. So, if we are not careful, and if we are not paying attention, we will hurt others. That's almost a default. Now, sometimes when we're very careful and we are paying attention, we will hurt others, okay? But the point is that as we live our lives, we need to be aware of others, and we need to be aware of their preferences and their needs, especially someone that's having a hard time. And now I'm going to give you a different example. Someone that was an alcoholic. Are you going to give them a bottle of wine? I hope you wouldn't anyway, but if that was your idea, here's a bottle of wine because this is a great idea. That's not a great idea. It's not okay, right? Someone that has an issue with a particular sin that they're fighting, giving them things related to that sin is probably not a helpful thing. And how many different ways can we have a problem with sin? Lots, right? The lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life are constantly before us, constantly tempting us. And there are lots of things that we might have trouble with. So now let's go back to the text, 1 Corinthians chapter 9. And also this is lesson 11. That'll be page 61 in the lesson book. And the entry says, a principle called sacrifice. If we sowed spiritual things in you, is it too much if we reap material things from you? That's the concept of this section. And remember, what was chapter 8 about? Not hurting your brother's conscience? Not being selfish? Here we go into lesson 9, and Paul's going to start talking about something else. And I want you to see if you understand what it is that's the problem. Chapter 9, verse 1. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are you not my work in the Lord? If I am not an apostle to others, yet doubtless I am to you. For you are the seal of my apostleship in the Lord. My defense to those who examine me in this. Do we have no right to eat and drink? Do we have no right to take along a believing wife, as do also the other apostles, the brothers of the Lord, and Cephas? Or is it only Barnabas and I who have no right to refrain from working? Whoever goes to war at his own expense. Who plants a vineyard and does not eat of its fruit? Or who tends a flock and does not drink of the milk of the flock? Do I say these things as a mere man, or does the law say the same also? For it is written in the law of Moses, you shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. Is it oxen? Why does that say that? My goodness, I'm having trouble reading it. Is it oxen God's concerned about? There we go. Man, I couldn't phrase that. Sorry. Or does he say it altogether for our sakes? For our sakes, no doubt this is written, that he who plows should plow in hope, and that he who threshes in hope should be partaker of his hope. If we sow spiritual things for you, it is a great thing. Is it a great thing if we reap your material things? If others are partakers of this right over you, are we not even more? Now, I'm going to ask a simple question. What's the problem? What is happening?
They don't want to support him?
You got it. They are obviously upset that he and Barnabas don't work and make their own living, but instead are having monies given to them for working in the congregations and being apostles. And let's see. Right. So we're on task here. Just making sure I didn't skip anything the lesson wanted to cover. Yep. So let's keep reading. Nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things, lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple, and those who serve at the altar partake of the offering of the altar? Even so, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. All right. Continuing the thought, what did priests eat in the Old Testament?
Sacrifice.
Items sacrificed to God. Part of it, yes. That was their portion. How did they get that, by the way?
Bringing their sacrifice.
By people sacrificing. And we see at the end of Judges how bad it became for a Levite who was supposed to be serving God in the temple when nobody came and gave sacrifices. What happened? What do you think happens when nobody comes to give sacrifice?
You got to take a job.
You don't have any food. That's what happens. There is nothing to eat. At some point, you will leave because there is no way to survive, right? Who suffers because of that? Everyone, right? The Jews themselves suffered. In fact, in Judges, we see a pattern of continuing cycles of belief, weakness, failure, doubt, captivity. Judge was raised up. Belief, we'll serve God, we'll do what's right. Doubt, failing, captivity, over and over again. Until at the very end, it is the saddest section of the Bible to me. The last two chapters in Judges, they make me want to give up. That's where I'm at. And thank goodness for the next book. What's the next book after Judges? Ruth, of course, because you need it. If you're reading the Bible and you've made it all the way to the end of Judges, you have no more hope for the Jews at all. And that's why you need some Ruth in your life. Because the story of Naomi and her daughter and being joined into the lineage of Christ, just amazing, amazing hope, amazing things that change the world, right? And yet right before that, the worst story of all, cutting up the concubine and all of these horrible things, brothers being cut off. It's just horrible. We don't need that. But here we are in Corinth, long time after the book of Judges. And what's happening in Corinth? Factions, sexual immorality, honoring those that are in sexual immorality, holding them up as great hope, it seems, or examples of how great God's forgiveness is, maybe. It doesn't quite say that, but there's something going on there. Inability to work with one another. Attacking the person that helped them start the congregation in the first place. And why would you do that? To gain control, to gain power. So instead of worshiping God and letting Christ be king, they're trying to become the owners of the area there and control the congregation and do what they want. If you haven't seen this before, look around. It's everywhere. That's what people do if they're not trying to serve God, they try to serve themselves. And you can look back at the time in Genesis, right after Cain and Abel, as every man did what was right in his own eyes. And because of that behavior, the entire world was destroyed. There was no more hope, with the exception of one family. That was it. Now, saying all that, what's the problem here? Are Paul and Barnabas working while they are preaching? But according to this, do you think they are here?
Oh, no.
No, they are not. And in fact, I think we have a hint of who's supporting them, don't we? There's another there's another epistle that talks about how they were stealing from this group to serve others because this particular group was giving them money so they could go and work somewhere else. Okay, so they were being funded by the churches. Now, number one problem that we can see right away, who should have been taking care of Paul and Barnabas when they were working in Corinth? The Corinthians. Period. This shouldn't have even been a question. It should have been a question of, why aren't you, sorry Lot, working? It should have been, how can we take care of you, right? But what was the problem with the heart? By inference, we can understand, who did they not want in their congregation? Paul and Barnabas. They wanted them out, right? Get out of here. You're great, and it's wonderful. I'm glad you helped us start up, but we're doing fine here. You can go on. Now, does it say that's what happened here? No. But just look at what's going on. They're doing all the things they shouldn't do. They're saying the things they shouldn't say. They're condoning it in the congregation. And they're trying to push out and criticize the people that are trying to help them. Sound familiar? That's what it looks like when you fall into sin and you're not repentant. When you have a problem and instead of wanting to change, you blame everyone else for that problem. That's what that looks like. How many different ways can you find to criticize and injure the person that's trying to help you? When you're drowning and you're panicking, you don't know what to do, and someone comes to save you, you grab onto them with both arms and both legs, and then you both sink like a rock. Right? Now, is that smart? No. It's not smart, but that's what happens. So, now that we're here, let's just go over this a little bit. Let's see. What's the basic principle that's being set here? By the way, this is really pivotal for us as a congregation, too. It's important, if we didn't already understand, is it okay to pay a preacher to work in a congregation? Yes. Is it okay to gather funds and help those that are serving God to continue doing that? Yes. Okay. I think we already were clear on that, but that's kind of where we got to here. All right. Verse 15, I've used none of these things, nor have I written these things that I should be done, that it should be done to me. For it would be better for me to die than anyone should make my boasting void. So what is Paul boasting about? His work. Specifically the work in Corinth. And now his work, whose work? It's Paul's work, but who provides the increase? God. So Paul and God were happy to have a church established in Corinth, and now that church in Corinth has gotten filthy. It needs a bath. So now, if they think he's talking about them giving him money, and they gave him money now, what would it look like? If this passage right here is heard by the Corinthians as, he needs some money, fine, here's some money. Is that the point? If that happened, it would look like Paul was just trying to get money from the church in Corinth, wouldn't it? And it would take their faith from low to none, perhaps. And so he's very concerned that they will get the wrong impression here. Instead, he wants to be able to boast that God did a great work in Corinth. He wants to be able to continue his work, and he wants them to listen and change their hearts. The rest of it is important, but that was not his focus. Verse 16, for I preach the gospel. For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for necessity is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. For if I do this willingly, I have a reward. But if against my will, I have been entrusted with a stewardship. What is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel. So what is Paul's focus? Preaching the gospel. And specifically, preaching the gospel for free to those that are listening. In other words, he's being funded from somewhere else so that he can focus specifically on doing good for those people, letting them hear the gospel, and instead of them hearing, hey, I need some money, they hear, hey, God is and was and will forever be, and Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and you need to change. The rest of those things should come, honestly, but his focus was not about money, is what he's trying to say here. Verse 19, for though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became as a Jew, that I might win Jews. To those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under the law towards Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak I became as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be a partaker of it with you. So who does Paul want to participate with in the gospel? Corinthians and Christians. He wants us all to be serving God together. And specifically here, he's pointing out that he does his best not to offend those he's trying to talk to, right? That when he's trying to work with someone, he, to the best of his ability, is going to try to fit into the culture that they are in so that he can have an influence on them, so that he can help them see the value of becoming a Christian. Does that mean that he does all of the sins with those that are lost so they can see him as an equal? No, he does not. And that's why it's important that it says, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ. He's always going to live as a Christian. But as a Christian, he found a way to live in a culture that was very Jewish. He found a way to live in a culture that was very Roman. He found a way to live in a culture that had a lot of weak brothers and sisters. Maybe that didn't have a lot of faith and didn't understand that that idol was fake. And that that meat that was served to that idol was nothing more than just meat that was cooked and was tasty and you can eat it. So he wouldn't eat that because he was concerned about those that were weak. All right? He wanted to become all things to all men that he could save some. And he did this for the gospel's sake, to be a partaker of it with you, the Corinthians. Not apart from you. I'm not trying to control you. I'm not trying to own you. I'm trying to be a brother of Christ with you. Now, there's two things that we can learn from Christ about how he taught and how he shared. The first is that he was very honest. And the second is that he looked into the hearts of those he spoke with. And he tried to talk to their hearts. First, establishing a rapport with them, the Sermon on the Mount. What are the first 12 verses doing? He's looking at this group of fairly poor individuals that may not think much of themselves. And he's highlighting characteristics that they had already. And telling them, those are really good things. You need to do this more. And then he goes into talking about some of the things they may be having trouble with. Paul here does the same thing in some ways. He's trying to get their hearts. And he's trying to make a sandwich. Good, bad, good. Right? There's some rough things in the middle, but we've got a cushion on both ends. I don't hate you. I don't want you to die. I want you to change. I don't want you to be saved, right? All right. So let's see. He offers 3 illustrations to support his right to stop tent making in order to receive full financial support. The soldier, the farmer, and the shepherd. The soldier whose uniforms were provided, the farmer who was afforded the right to live off the land, and the shepherd who has the right to milk from his own flock. And I never thought about that one, by the way. I mean, I guess farmers milk cows, right? Shepherds milk sheep. I didn't ever think about it, but there you go. All right, it's more than just common sense, and this is definitely supported by Old Testament law. Under the Old Testament, again, we already covered it. Sacrifices were part of the portion that was given to those that were serving in the temple. Paul is trying very hard to reach their hearts. I got something on my tablet. How'd that happen? Get off there. And in doing so, he's hoping that they're listening. Spoiler warning, they listened. 2 Corinthians is all about them listening almost too well. All right, so his letter was received. But let's continue talking about this. Paul's sacrifice. What is Paul's sacrifice? Because he talks about it in verse 15 through 18. What is that sacrifice? And really, it's the same thing we just talked about. What is he doing? How is he sacrificing himself?
Being willing not to be supported and still going to work.
Yep. But he was supported.
Yes,
Absolutely. And he was supported better than he thought he would have been, based on what he talks to the Philippians about, especially as poor as they were. They were able to give far beyond what was expected. And here the Corinthians, are they poor? No. In fact, maybe they needed to be a little poorer because their wealth, their power, it seems, or some of the things like that, their lifestyle, was taking them away from God and changing the congregation into something that it shouldn't be. All right, so he's sacrificing. Why?
Because it's his responsibility.
And?
He was entrusted by God with doing this.
Yes, and one more thing. Because it's twofold. And he actually says it. Number one, did he even see an option of not preaching? No. In fact, he says it's from compulsion. I'm being made to preach. But what does he want? Absolutely. He wants fruit from his labor, right? He wants people to listen and understand and change and be godly and put God first and choose to be self-controlled and choose to be aware of each other and kind and loving and tender. Those are the things that he wants. He tried to be everything for everyone. Can you do that?
Not well.
No. But you can try. You can try to understand the weaknesses of those that you're dealing with. You can try to find common ground so you have something to talk about. Very rarely have I ever had any success just walking up to someone and saying, "You're going to hell!" I know that it has worked for others. So I'm not saying that that's not necessarily something that could have an effect. But what I am saying is that you're far more likely to have an impact on someone if you understand who they are and you talk with them as a friend. And you share with them your thoughts and listen to their thoughts. Because that method is actually how we all live all the time. And if you're ever in a situation where that's not occurring, you will immediately know it. You will immediately realize this person is not being real. They're not listening to me. We're not having a conversation, but instead, they're just yapping. And oftentimes what do you do when your parents are nagging you? That's a bad word. You're nagging me. Or I'm bored. We'll go there. What do you do when your parents are nagging you? If you're trying to influence someone, is that the behavior you want out of them? No. If someone turns their hearing aids off, just write it on the board, right? They can read. Somehow or other, trying to reach people can be difficult. And Paul is trying all of the ways that he can think of, it seems, to do just that. And that's what he's talking about. In this battle, is he using a physical sword? No. It's a spiritual battle. And this is the problem. How long do we live? Longer, perhaps, than we should. Or not long enough. It just depends on how your life is going at the time. And because of that inconsistency, it's in our weakest points that we are most tempted. Trying to work with people means that you have to understand that they can have weaknesses and problems. And sometimes maybe they don't see what's going on. Paul is trying desperately to talk to the hearts of the Corinthians so that they will change. And so verse 24, he tries to change their perspective one more time. Do you not know that those who run in a race, all run, but one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. And everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Now they do it to obtain a perishable crown, but we for an imperishable crown. Therefore I run thus, not with uncertainty. Thus I fight, not as one who beats the air. But I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. First question I have for you is, was that honest? Did Paul mean that? Yeah, you can hear it, can't you? How old is this? This isn't a whole text, right? Wasn't written yesterday. But yet I can still hear Paul's heart in this message. Question number 2. Did they listen? Do you think that this made them understand that he was saying, you're going to lose your crown. You're going to go to hell if you continue this behavior. You are not doing well, and you need to change. You think they heard that message when they read this?
Yes.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Well, this is the book that, or the letter that he was very concerned on how he wasn't getting a response and heard back from him. He was very concerned and sent somebody to try to get a report.
For sure.
And then he found out, and that's what started 2 Corinthians. Like, oh, you guys did well, bud. Now you're doing these things.
Right. By the way, you might want to let me know when you listen. Good job, guys, but hey. And how common is that, right? We are really bad on balance, aren't we? If we're leaning way over here and they're like, hey, look, you're gonna have to move to your right a little bit or you're gonna fall over. Okay. Right? Oh no, I fell over. We are very inconsistent with our listening, with our behaviors, and lots of things. And Paul here was trying his best to reach out to them and get them to listen. Let's see, I'm almost ready for the bell that we don't need, but I'm going to get it anyway. Maybe. There it is. All right. We got a lot of discussion questions. Let's see if we can get through some of them. What 3 rights does Paul declare in verses 4 through 6? And what reason did he forfeit each of these? What message was he sending to the Corinthians? I think we covered that pretty well. Does anyone remember?
He has the right to eat meat, he has the right to be married, and he has the right to receive financial support.
That's right. And he was forfeiting those rights, wasn't he? It was his right, but he wasn't taking them from the Corinthians. What is he trying to tell the Corinthians?
I'll be exalted.
Wake up, right? He's trying to say, look, I'm not taking these things, but I could. I'm allowed to. Why are you criticizing me? I'm not even doing these things, but yet you're criticizing me. Why? What is the point here? The point is he's trying to get their attention. Verse 2, question number 2, what is meant? Wait, I even got a slide. Wow, look at that. Discussion questions. What is meant in verse 2? If we sowed spiritual things in you, is it too much if we reap material things from you?
He contributed to their spiritual increase and to, their connection with God and Christ. And so in return, him having the expectation of those things that he had a right to
It shouldn't have been a problem,
Shouldn't have been a problem,
right?
yeah.
But yet it was.
like
And
that is increasing you, so you can support those who brought that to you.
And just pulling that out in context, what is it that they were criticizing Paul and Barnabas for?
Not working.
Not working. It wasn't even their money. They weren't even getting they weren't giving anything to Paul and Barnabas, but they weren't working, and someone else was sending them money. Well, I can't believe they would have that audacity to not work like everyone else does, right? Now, that attitude can certainly catch us if we're not careful. Question number 3, sometimes gospel preachers then and now have given up the right for the greater good. One preacher went back to teaching school because the church was growing and needed bigger facility in which to continue and assemble. He can continue to preach, but his sacrifice enabled them to accomplish the goal and in the end teach and reach more people. Discuss some principles churches should consider when carrying out the command. So also the Lord directed those who proclaim the gospel to get their living from the gospel. I think we talked about this a little bit. Is it okay to pay a preacher? Yes? How much?
Good.
Woo! Don't have to answer that one. But that's the problem, right? All of a sudden, we agree to pay a preacher. How much are we going to pay a preacher? Well, enough to make a living. Well, what does that mean? How much? I don't know. What makes sense? How much can the congregation afford? How much can it afford? And if it can't afford it, is it okay for him to reach out to someone else to get support? Or is it wrong for him to think that he should be supported beyond the bounds of this congregation? These questions cause conflict in the church still to this day. The answer, though, is that the preacher can be paid for preaching, can't he? And it's okay if he gets a congregation here to pay him. It's also okay if he seeks financial support from other congregations to preach in a particular area. These are fine. In fact, how do we know they're fine? Because this is what Paul and Barnabas were literally doing. They're preaching in this place, being supported from another place. That's certainly an example of which we have more than just this one. All right, question 4. Woe is me if I do not preach the gospel. Paul felt a duty and obligation to Christ. What did he say about the same? What did he say about the same in Romans 1:14 through 16? And what did Jeremiah declare about his passion for preaching in 20, verse 9?
It's a fire.
He's compulsed. He has to inside. It's his passion, right? Yes, sir?
Thank you for the service. And all this brings up another thing. Some would say we won't support a preacher because he's not an apostle. But the fact of the matter is, I think it's Acts 13, it said that they were sent forth, not just Paul, but Barnabas too. They were apostles of the church in where it was in Acts 13. And so it's not just for people who are apostles, because there's an apostle of Christ and there's an apostle of a congregation. We send out money for other people to preach in other places within Florida because they are our apostles.
Right.
We send them forth with orders, which is what the word means.
And that's interesting. Gary is always good with the English language. Let's make sure that we don't make the word apostle mean something it doesn't mean. Just like angel. What does angel mean? The hand of God. Okay? What does apostle mean? Sent out. When UPS comes to your house, they were an apostle of the local post office. We don't use it that way. Why don't we use it that way? I don't know. Why did we make a special word? I don't know. We transliterate some words to mean have special value. But anyway, Let's just continue this real quick. Verse 5, what did Paul mean in verse 22? I've become all things to all men. I think we covered that. What is he trying to do? He's trying to reach hearts. Historically, one of the temptations facing American preachers in foreign lands is to Americanize the gospel. The gospel message doesn't change, but the gospel message must learn to adapt. Again, we're supposed to be all things to all people. So if we're in a very Jewish community, should we go and just talk about how bad Jews are? Is that a good idea? Or if we're in a community of people that all have motorcycles, should we go in to that community and tell them all that their motorcycles are going to kill them, and that without getting rid of their motorcycles, they can't be Christians? No. Understand who you're talking with, and also make sure you understand the gospel so you don't add to or take away from it, right? Okay, in the last question, what is the challenge of verse 24 according to verses 25 and 27 that is striving for the crown? And how are we meeting that challenge? Are we striving to make it to heaven, or are we missing the mark, is what he's asking. And we could just talk about this for the rest of our lives and never quite finish. But I just want to give this idea to you. Always make sure you look in the mirror and remember who you are. Because if you don't, you might find yourself falling and not even realize it. All right, we're done with our class. Appreciate it, guys.